帰り。
Hello everyone, I'm Aox, and I profess to not being particularly fond of kids. It's a charming aspect of personality, I know, but I think it's mostly derived from the fact that they represent things that I've since lost, a sense of wonder and discovery and innocence, yet untainted by the knowledge that vor is a real fetish that people get off to, things like that. However, I worry that I've set a troubling precedent, since after my glowing review of Made in Abyss, several correspondents suggested I would very much enjoy Neverland as well, and the main through line there is the immense suffering of children. Now, I may not love children, that much is true, but I certainly don't begrudge them their existence. I mean, I'm certainly not going to sweep my fucking chimney, am I? No, I don't hate children. I think they're largely tolerable. Through an unfortunate twist of circumstance, I happened to be one once, and even if I've thankfully left those dark days behind me, I've still got that bloody mammalian protectorate instinct that sees a younger version of my species and thinks I should probably try and ensure that these things don't die. A response, of course, that Neverland's writer Kaiju Shirai looks at with the same eyes with which that pisser of a squirrel from The Emperor's New Groove looked at that balloon animal. And it's with that in mind that we head into the wonderful world of Cloverworks, who I realize I may have misjudged, The Promised Neverland, which appears to be a lovely stately Victorian countryside estate turned orphanage wherein a large amount of children live idyllic lives before being adopted and everyone's very happy all of the time. This means that you've even the slightest clue, you're probably spending the first 5 minutes working out which of the little bastards are going to bite it first. Gosh, this is all a bit grim, isn't it? Let's liven things up a bit for comedy. There we go. That's much better. Now, in case you didn't heed the spoiler warning I threw up at the start of this video, and whilst it's not that huge of a spoiler if you're even slightly genre savvy, the specifics of the reveal of the true nature of Grace Field is a rather impactful moment, and I'd feel remiss in revealing it if you've not seen it. So to put the cart before the horse a bit, please do go and watch Neverland if you haven't. It's a very good show. Our protagonists, Emma, Norman, and Ray, are going to get to the bottom of just what exactly is going on here, and they do so over the course of, oh wait, no, alright, they've figured it out. Yes, our lovely little tykes have found themselves as cattle being raised in a comfortable environment until their appointed shipping date to be eaten by the funny people with extraordinarily long hands. I'd play more coy about the nature of the kids' situation, but considering the promotional art has them literally standing on a dinner plate, it's not a particularly well-kept secret. The initial comparison between Abyss and Neverland were more to do with tone, it turns out, than any major plot beats, since what we're dealing with here is, as several correspondents have suggested, a rather straightforward retelling of Aardman's chicken runs. The meat industry is kind of unpleasant if you look at it from the perspective of the cattle metaphor, without the filter of some plucky Brits with a mound of clay, a video camera, and a Peter pamphlet to steer it into more palatable territory. And thus the comparison to James Matthew Barrie's Neverland, a place where kids never grow up. But not for the same reasons as Pan's lovely little island getaway. Less second star to the right, more straight until morning. But, you know, the sad. Like the grieving kind of mourning, the one that has the U in it. It's a lot more clever on paper. Thus, Emma, Norman, and Ray must escape Grace Field before their day to be adopted arrives. Uh-oh, looks like the step-headed red child wants to bring the whole family along, and now the quiet weekend getaway is ruined. The prospect of escaping already seems basically impossible. With every new revelation about the forces stacked against them, a successful escape feels even further away, but when those chances are combined with Emma's overbearing shonen protagonist-style determination to save every one of the children, including the toddlers, suddenly the odds seem completely astronomical. It would be easy to view her goal as irritating naivete, but Cloverworks do a fantastic job of making Emma's desire to save everyone feel justified. The direction and facial expressions are fantastic across the board. Without words, we know that she recognizes herself that her task is impossible, but for her own sake, she can't let herself believe that. It'd be easy to make her a very frustrating character, but her barely concealed desperation turns her into a hugely sympathetic one we dearly want to see succeed. It's a story about hope against impossible odds, something the strangely off-tone but nonetheless extremely good opening hammers in with its metaphors of a match almost going out before lighting a fuse, and the narrative of staying strong and never giving up despite the encroaching darkness that constantly assails our leads makes for a thrilling, if excruciatingly anxiety-inducing experience. Which is, of course, where the troubles started for me, not in a narrative sense, but in a, an I can't take much more of this sense. I made a conscious decision after watching the first 2 episodes of Neverland that I'd rather binge the show all at once come season's end so as to have a more complete picture in my mind of the whole show without the week-long gaps between each episode so as to better facilitate writing this very script. Certain as I was of the infallibility of this strategic masterstroke, you can imagine my surprise when it turned out to be a terrible, terrible mistake. Yes, I have a confession to make, dear audience. I'm not the iron-willed stallion of a man you take me to be. The truth is, I have a tendency to be something of a big loser coward, you might say, perhaps something of a sniveling piss baby. I handle tension about as well as the Tacoma Narrows Bridge did.
Steel girders buckle and giant cables snap like puny threads. There it goes!
Watching this show in that manner was, unfortunately, almost impossible for me. The tension became so thick as to become basically impenetrable, because it isn't scary so much as it is just dreadfully ominous. Neverland's greatest trick is that its horror is almost entirely psychological. The kids aren't actively being hunted, the threat is not immediate, at least it isn't yet. Rather, it's a struggle against time and odds. Isabella's main method of retaliation is to be content allowing the time they have remaining to tick down, and good lord if they don't want to give you a phobia of clocks by the end of this show. And it really is time that's the true villain in Neverland, something that Cloverworks has gone to pains to ensure you're constantly, painfully aware of. Clocks and calendars pop up in almost every other shot. Camera movements mimic the swinging of a clock's pendulum. Here's a clock, there's a clock. Clocks everywhere. God, I'm glad I'm home alone recording this. There's even an entire sequence where all non-diegetic sound is kept to a minimum, and instead the only sound is the sound of a clock striking midnight, which we're subjected to the entirety of. And then Isabella turns to the camera and says, "It's about time." I wish more anime straight up told me what their main theme is. Really, the quality of the sound design and the editing at large in Neverland is the reason I decided I wanted to review it in the first place. It's a phenomenally put together television program. Some of the smartest editing I've seen in a show as of late. Of course, as I just said, the sound design is utterly fantastic and complements the show extraordinarily well. Given the earlier comparison to Made in Abyss, I was initially rather disappointed that Mr. Penkin wasn't heading up the score here, since I thought his style would lend itself marvelously to a show like this, but he's too busy off winning BAFTAs and scoring perfectly okay isekai shows. Instead, we have a soundtrack composed by Takehiro Obata, one of the people responsible for the incredible soundtrack of Attack on Titan. Junior High. Something Obata's score does very well, though, is play on the strengths of the narrative and reinforce that sense of there always being something wrong that nobody wants to talk about. The jaunty music, for example, has the sound of knives being sharpened, just so you know exactly what's going on behind the scenes. They never give you a moment to rest when it comes to the constant anxiety in any and every aspect of the show's design. It is fucking exhausting. I've also been completely fixated on the song that should hopefully be in the middle of playing now, called Tag, and it's a wonderfully smartly executed piece of music that I would gush about were I not already stretching the word limit as it is. Suffice to say, it's a marvelous song, and any song that can pull off steel drums is an effective song in my opinion. A lot of stuff in here sounds reminiscent of some of Akira Yamaoka's work on Silent Hill too. It's all industrial groaning noises with a discordant synth to back it. The incongruity of tracks like that with the seemingly pleasant setting again serves to highlight the horrible truth behind Grace Field, and it all works so goddamn well. That said, I think the smartest part of Neverland's sound design is in the way it exercises restraint. Sometimes during the biggest revelations, they'll just drop the score entirely without even sound effects. They'll just let the oppressive silence overwhelm you with its inexistence. The silence makes things feel real in a way. Huge plot revelations are met with silence because life doesn't have a soundtrack. It's, again, a very intelligently executed thing. And really one of the things I respect the most about Neverland overall is how much it respects its audience. Once we learn the true nature of Grace Fields, we aren't constantly reminded of it. They let the atmosphere hold you prisoner rather than the plot. And the editing is really what turns this pleasant orphanage into a nightmarish panopticon. We're constantly given viewpoints into normal proceedings with uncomfortable Dutch angles, dolly zooms, panning through obstacles. They even break the 180-degree rule so as to intentionally confuse you. At least I hope they did that intentionally, and I'm not making the hilariously embarrassing mistake of assuming a slip-up to be a clever editing decision. You can only go, oh look, they fucked up. How visionary, so many times before all credibility drains away like semen down the college dorm's shower drain. But the best way to explain how Neverland does this is to explain a particularly prominent example, so let's get all fun and technical. During the scene in which Norman and Emma are discussing their situation, we first see them in the far corner of a very darkly lit room, standing next to a window. Obvious metaphors here. Insignificance, clinging onto the last vestiges of hope against an overwhelming evil. The room itself is where they're tested, which plays an important part in the order they get shipped out in, etc. But mid-conversation, without bringing any attention to it, the scene shifts from the dark, industrial-looking testing room to a brightly lit room in their house. The scene change seems to be positive until we realize where they are. The pantry. This revelation comes right as Norman realizes what part of the human body the demons enjoy eating the most. I'm not going to insult your intelligence by explaining what they're going for here, but that shift from a dark, scary room to a seemingly innocent, happier one also further highlights that this is all a charade, and that things that seem bright and cheerful are actually only hiding a terrible reality. We also have clever cuts between plot threads. As with most shows, you'll have your A story and your B story in any given episode, but in Neverland they really enjoy their jarring cuts between the two. You'll have the children happily talking about escaping whilst in another room another child is experiencing something terrifying, and it all serves to complement that feeling of constant unease, tension, and mystery. They always cut the happiness with the tension. There is never a moment to rest. They always undercut the relief. Every victory can almost feel hollow. I swear you can almost hear the editors laughing, saying, "This'll get 'em, those pricks. Do you know what I had to put up with for 240 minutes? It all comes together to create a wonderfully, exhaustingly oppressive atmosphere. Neverland's content to sit back and allow the creeping sense of dread and unease to eat away at you like a corrosive acid, just as with most excellently executed thrillers. It's a slow-burning, inexorable breed of terror, the overbearing nightmare of a backdrop from which our protagonists desperately work to escape, but as long as they are in Grace Field, its shadow can never be fully overcome, and the implication that even once out of the farm they'll still be in incredible danger drapes an atmosphere of almost suffocating anxiety over the entirety of the proceedings, like a cake whose baker zealously overused the icing. Horror for me is a trial to get through. I recall back when I first played Silent Hill, an experience of which the most appropriate simile would be drowning in an ocean of mud with a plastic bag on my head, and the denouement of finally beating the odds and overcoming that challenge is, I presume, what horror is all about, and in that aspect, Neverland shines. It's incredibly effective, almost to a fault. Even if it was tough for me to watch, the fact that I couldn't stop despite that should tell you all you need to know about its quality. It's a damn good psychological horror. Or at least I think it is. I wouldn't know, since I'm a big piss baby.